multi-rig. Crikey, if I had £1 for every person asked me to tie one of these up, either on the bank or at a conference, I'd be a very rich man indeed. The multi-rig, I think, is accepted as being invented by Mike Kavanagh, or first popularised by Mike Kavanagh. That would be mid-2000s. Back in those days, I simply used to use a braided rig most of the time. Various coated hook lengths came in, and I ended up using coated hook lengths and tying a small pop-up either on a swivel or on a braid or whatever. Wasn't the best of ways, because often you just get one take, the braid would be moved and you'd have to tie up another rig. I saw the multi-rig and I thought, oh, that's a great way of using a pop-up. Started off in 2007, I think it was, fishing one of my local waters at the time, which was called Drax, or the Northern Still Water, or whatever you want to call it. I had a good summer, caught quite a few fish, but occasionally I did drop one or two. I saw the Mike Kavanagh multi-rig, and so started with my very, very first mock-up of it, which really worked well. I think the first time I used it was, I think about September onwards, and I think that day I had a 30, 220s and a big double, and I thought, this is so simple and so good. And then from 2007 onwards, which we're now talking 8, nearly 9 years, I've constantly changed the multi-rig. It's very different from when I first used it, which was a very, very basic one, and looking back it was actually very crude. So the version you see here now probably has had about, I would say, about 20 changes from the very, very first start. There's been various changes, hook patterns, there's been the coated hook length, the way I attach it, the way I mount the pop-ups, the swivel mounting, the loop mounting, whether I add putty on it, how I steam it. So what you're seeing here is going to be literally 8, 9 years of development. Lots and lots of different product shots. Now, quite a bit of this product is from Nash, but there are products from everybody that are great. Gardner do great hooks, Fox do great hooks, ESP do great hook lengths. It's a matter of using what you think is good. Now, all I will say is if you copy what I'm doing here today to the nth degree, it will work. Clearly, if you start, messing around with different things and it doesn't work, don't blame me. You can't blame me if you change something. But if you've got things that you're confident with, then use those. But if you aren't confident, then copy mine and then adapt it to how you think. You might think I'm using slightly different pattern of hook than you would use. Maybe you use a different hook length. Maybe you'd undershot or critically balance rather than just slightly overshotting as I do. But it's really up to you. So as I say, copy what I do and you won't have any problems. When I first started using the multi-rig, I just used one pattern of hook, and that was simply a curved shank hook. I think way back in the day it was a Gardner Mugger, but now I use the Nash Fang X. Now I use two different patterns of hook. I use the Fang Twister and I use the Fang X. Both are under the Fang range from Nash. Now the Fang X hook is what I would call the traditional curved shank hook. Now the big advantage of the multi-rig that people seem to hark on about, but it doesn't bother me at all, is that when you catch a fish, you can merely move the loop back into position again and start all over again without having to change your hook. If you damage your hook, you can again just take the hook off, put the loop back through, etc, etc. Being quite honest, I can count on maybe 2 hands how many times I've ever changed a hook with a multi-rig. If I have a multi-rig and I have a fish, if the hook is still sharp and I can pull the loop back into position, then that's great. So waters where I'm getting lots of takes in a day, somewhere from maybe 10 to 10 takes in a day, or if I'm catching bream, then I'll use the traditional curved shank hook. So that's the Fang X, which I'm going to show you how to tie up later. This allows me to, in effect, every time I've had a fish, just pull the loop back up and I'm ready to use it again. However, if I'm fishing for bigger fish, then I use what you'll see as more of a what I call an aggressive hook, a square bend hook, and that's the fang twister. As you're able to see when I tie that up, because I use it with shrink tube, you're not going to be able to use this twice. So this really is my big fish rig, or waters where I'm only going to get one bite. Now the fang twister with the shrink tube is a far more aggressive form of presentation, and really that's my preferred form of presentation. But if you're getting lots of takes in a day, you're getting bream and things like that, you could potentially go through a lot of hooks and hook lengths. The question is it worth it to you? Well, it is to me. Yeah, I may now get the gear at free or reduced prices, but way back in the day, certainly in the 2000s, I had to pay for it just as you, and it was just one of those things. I accepted that if I got a fish, I had to tap a new hook length. Cost the same amount of money then as it did now in comparative terms, so to me it's worth it. So two types here. Single bite is the twister, and for getting multiple takes it's the Fang X. Right, whichever of these you use, and I'll describe them separately, you need a coated braid. There are a variety of coated braids, depends on the stiffness that you want. You've got the Fox end, which is very, very stiff, and then you've got the ESPN, which is a lot less stiff. This is probably what I call in the middle, which is what I use for quite a lot of my presentations, in fact probably most of my presentations. This is a weed green, but you can also have gravel brown. Do I think it makes a massive difference, the colour? Not quite sure really, but generally over a weedy or a choddy bottom I'll use a green version. Over a sand or a muddy bottom or clay I'll use the brown version. So we'll start off. The first thing you have to do is tie the loop. Now I must have tied this loop thousands, if not tens of thousands, over the years. But no matter what, the first time you tie the loop to make sure the loop's the perfect size, often you get it wrong. But when you've tied one or two, you can literally tie 10 in a day, which is what I'll do. I will literally tie 10 multi-rigs in probably less than 10 minutes, so I can take them with me. So you've got your coated braid. Strip a bit of your coated braid out, probably about that much, and just literally make a loop like that underneath and pull it through. As you can see, you've got your tag end there, and it's a matter of getting the right size loop. So you've got to guess that first. So I'm using a size 5 today, so as you see, I've created the loop. The first thing that people tend to make a mistake with is they tie that loop and they give it a great big yank. Coated braid for the multi-rig is no good if you break that knot and it flops over. So once you've tied that loop, all I do is get a pair of forceps and I literally just gently tie that knot. That's tied and tightened, and that will not move. Remember, that knot can only move that way. That will not break. There's no need to add super glue, there's no need to pull it to death. So once you've done that, just literally trim it off under there. So that tag is cut. Now some people like to leave a longer tag end and add bits of shot, bits of putty. I've tried a variety of ways of doing this, but I've always found that cutting the tag end off and mounting my shot on the unbroken down there is far better. So that's the first part. You may have one or two goes and get it wrong, but that will happen. But once you get the first knot or two correctly sized and the loop correctly, you'll be able to do 10 in a few minutes. Having tied the loop, somehow we've got to get that loop through the eye of that hook. As you can see, we're starting off firstly with what I call the curved shank hook. So this is the Nash Fang X. I think Gardner do a version called the Mugger. It's got that curve, but I actually like this hook, just got a slight turn on the hook eye. How do you get that loop through that eye? Well, before I actually came up with this little idea, it used to drive me mad. I used to try and push it through, pull it through. I broke fingernails, I broke coated braids, and in the end I came up with a very, very simple way, having just seen a guy pulling a line through some anti-tangle tube, and I thought, well, why don't I use that idea? So what I do is I've got some unwaxed dental floss, you know, it's the Nash bait floss or whatever you want to use. trim a bit off there and just drop that through. Okay, so that's dropped through there. Now wet it, and what you're going to do is you're going to thread that through the eye of that hook, and that is a lot simpler than trying to get 25-pound braid through it, or coated braid. See how easy that went through? So you've now got the unwaxed dental floss, or the bait floss, there. Just pull it through. All I do is, there you go. You have now pulled that coated braid through that eye without any problem whatsoever. I know it's simple, but always pull it through that way. So there you have, you've got your coated braid, you've got your hook, and that's your loop created. You can literally tell immediately whether that will go over the top of the hook, which it will. If it's too big a loop, you'll end up with a massive part underneath, which is no good. If it's too small, you won't get it over the top of the hook bend. So you've got to actually guesstimate it. It might take 1 or 2 goes to get it right, but that on a first go is there and thereabouts. That's the first part of it. You bait floss and just pulling it through. The next stage is to consider how you're actually going to mount your pop-up. Now, I know the multi-rig can be used with bottom baits, it can be used with wafters, it can be used with pop-ups. I have to say that for 99% of the time that I use a multi-rig, I use it with pop-ups, and I use it with what I call firm pop-ups. In the olden days, I used to use that little rig ring. I used to tie a dental floss loop round, pull it tight, add a bit of super glue. And that wasn't the easiest thing in the world to do. In fact, it did take some time, and I was never 100% confident in it. I then saw these things, which I think originally were brought out by Rigmarole, and they were the little bait spikes. And what it meant is that, in effect, the ring there, which is what I used to, if you take away the threaded bit, I used to tie a loop of dental floss and tie my pop-up to that. Well, all of a sudden it came with this screw-in spike. And when you look at that screw-in spike, you think, well, that'll never hold a pop-up. Well, if your pop-ups are firm, believe you me, once you screw that in, they won't come off. I can honestly say, with the pop-ups I've used, I've never ever had a pop-up come off on the cast. The number of people at conferences that don't have confidence in, and then we screw that in and they cannot pull it out. And if they can't pull it out by hand, believe you me, a carp won't, a bream won't, or whatever. So for mounting of my pop-ups on the pop-up rig, I always use a bait spike. Now, bait spikes have improved tremendously. The original one from Rigmarole are out. Tasker brought some great ones out, and Nash do them as well. I think the King of the Pond do as well. So a variety of firms do the bait spikes, but that's what I always mount my pop-ups on. Again, you've got to make sure that the pop-up you use is firm enough, so very, very soft pop-ups are not going to mount on a bait spike. You then have to dental floss them on, but for me the bait spike works perfectly. First thing you need to do when you're about to put your bait spike on is ensure that that's not twisted, because if that's twisted, then it will not allow your spike to run up and down when the carp are seeking to eject it or hook themselves. So first of all, look and make sure that's not twisted. That's not twisted. So what we do is we get the bait spike and we just push that through there. Dead simple, absolutely dead simple. Again, look at it, make sure it's not twisted. And when you have one constant colour, it's very easy to make a mistake. That is now not twisted. That will then go right over the top of there. That's such a simple thing. See how that goes over and underneath. Again, you can see that's not twisted, and we're going to pull it back slightly. Get hold of your bait spike and just look where that is. As you can see from there, that is a straight double loop. If there was a twist in that, that would not move up and down. But that is just about right. I tend to have, as you can see here, it exiting about the middle of the bend of the hook, just there. If you go too far, it'll come off. I have seen people mount it higher up. It's a bit too high for me. And I've seen people mount it very, very low, and I do find that it tends to tip all over, which I don't like. But generally that is the perfect position. You've got about 5mm underneath the hook eye to the knot. That is absolutely spot on. And again, you don't see how that spike is? That is absolutely spot on. Having done the loop, got it through and got it sitting perfectly, the question is what do you do next? Now I've seen lots and lots of different ideas, and I'm sure they're all very valid, but I can only tell you what works for me. Some people don't break the coating and just literally add putty around there. Some people break the coating and add putty on the tag end and so on and so on. All I can say is literally 99% of the fish I've had, and I've experimented a number of occasions doing those versions, have come to one simple version, which is where I break the coating underneath the knot. I don't break it too much, because what I want is that hook with a break in the coating to be able to spin round whatever way the carp approaches it. Now as you can see, I have no nails whatsoever, and yet I can still break the coating on most braids. So all you do is, just using your fingernails, just strip it back slightly. That's all it needs to be. Literally 5mm. As you can see, that break in the coating allows that hook to spin, and I'll show you that when we've got the shot on and the putty on, but that allows it to spin whatever way the carp approaches. In magazines you always see the carp approaching dead in line with whatever way the hook's pointing. Well, that doesn't happen in real life. So by allowing that to be broken, it can spin round at whatever way the carp picks it up and approaches it. Very, very simple. If your coated braid doesn't break as well as that, there are versions, there are tools that you can actually, I think Fox do one, I'm not sure if Nash do one, which allow you to strip that, but I personally prefer to use my nails, and I ain't got any nails, and that just gives it a little bit of movement. Always be very careful when you use tools to strip this, because if you break any of the threads, it just loses all strength. But as you can see, that can move around, and that's absolutely perfect. We now move on to the hook baits. As I said earlier, some people use this with bottom baits. Why not? Some people use it with wafters. Why not? But you know, virtually all of my fish have come to pop-ups. Now there are lots and lots of different pop-ups in the market, and all, you know, they're all good pop-ups, but they're only good if they stay attached to the rig and they do what they should do. So you've got to ensure that your pop-ups actually do pop up and hold the hook off the deck. I like very, very buoyant pop-ups, and depending what bait I'm using, I'll either use the one straight from the manufacturer, be it Nash or otherwise, or occasionally, if the bait manufacturer that supplies me with my bait, it's a soft bait, then I sometimes have to get my pop-ups made by other people. Now Proper Job pop-ups actually make my pop-ups when I'm using various baits. When I use the Nash Amber Strawberry, the pop-ups are rock hard and very buoyant as they come. But when you use something like the Key, or sometimes the 4G Squid, the pop-ups are a bit too soft to use with a bait spike for periods of time, especially when there's bream presence. So what I do is I have Proper Job pop-ups make my pop-ups for me. They use exactly the same Nash ingredients, the base mix, the attractors, and he just simply makes my pop-ups for me, charges a very reasonable price and produces them. When I'm using bottom baits or things like that, the standard Nash ones as they come are perfect. But as you can see, I've got two types of pop-ups here. We've got the barrel, which is a 15mm, and we've got the round one, straightforward, what is a normal pop-up, which is 12mm, 11-12mm. Now those pop-ups are ultra buoyant, and they will hold the bait off the deck for certainly 24 hours or longer, which is absolutely essential. A pop-up which flops over is absolutely no good at all. I want that pop-up to be nailed on the deck and to spin round whichever way the carp approaches. If it's not buoyant, it won't do that, and you only need a little bit of weed around that hook point, and that hook, you know, that presentation is a waste of time. So it's absolutely essential to make sure that whatever pop-up you use, it is buoyant enough to hold up the hook. Now I think I've got there a size 6 Fang X. I used the hooks, probably the biggest I use is a 5 and the smallest I use is an 8, and that's quite a big hook to a lot of people, a size 5, and that's quite a small pop-up to people, but believe you me, that will take some putty to hold it down. So it's a matter of picking the right pop-ups. No point blaming the hook or the presentation of the pop-up. It's you at the end of the day who should be doing your testing at home. So here you've got what looks like a very subtle bait screw, and I must admit when I first looked at these I thought, well, they're never going to hold a pop-up, but believe you me, they do. Get whatever pop-up you want to use, and we're going to use the round one there, and just push it in to start with, and then just keep screwing it in. As you can see, it's actually quite a long way, and believe you me, when that gets to there and I'm pulling that, that will not come out at all, and that is mounted perfectly on there. Absolutely spot on. That will not come off at all. And the same goes with the barrel. Again, you can mount them that way or you can mount them long ways. I always tend to mount them that way. Again, just push in and screw in. I tend to screw it to that level. If you can screw it too much, you've got to remember that all pop-ups expand. If you screw it too far in like that and the pop-up expands, it will actually stop that going up and down. So don't screw it too far in. I like to see it right at the end, just so you can start to see where the first screw threads are, and that is absolutely perfect. That will not come off at all in a million years. So use the right pop-up for the right occasion. Having mounted the pop-up correctly, it's a question of then using whatever putty etc. that you want to hold the pop-up down. Now remember, that's an ultra buoyant pop-up, and when I read of people using size 6 or 7 or 8 hooks and it'll just take a number 8 shot to hold it down, in my opinion that is, your pop-up is not buoyant enough, because if it takes a number 8 to hold it down, after that pop-up's been in the water a couple of hours or a bream's had a go at it, that pop-up will flop over. So my pop-ups take quite a bit to sink them. As you can see here, I've got a little tub with various shots and bits of putty. I'm a bit of a bore when it comes to fishing. I tend to follow that if it ain't bust, don't fix it. So my starting point for most waters, or the waters I'm approaching at the moment, are a size 6 Fang X or a size 6 twister. I either use the barrel 15mm or I'll use a little round 11-12mm, and I know that in order to hold those down I have one shot which is a number 6, and I have 2 different sizes of putty. Rather than keep taking the putty out each and every time, when I finish the session I take the shot off, I take the putty off and I put it in there, so that I know that is roughly the right amount of putty that I need. That's a Yorkshireman to me, I guess. I don't want to throw the putty away. It also makes it a lot easier. So as you can see, you've got a load of shot in there, all split, and you've got lots and lots of pieces of the Klingon tungsten putty, and it's just a matter then of putting your shot on the hook length and then putting the putty over the top of it. Now I've heard a lot of rubbish talked about putting shot on hook lengths. I agree if you're putting a shot on a monofilament hook length or a fluorocarbon hook length and squeezing it, that will crush the mono or the fluorocarbon, break it, and that is stupid. But on things like braid or coated hook lengths, it does not make any difference whatsoever. When I put one of the shots on the hook length, I sometimes squeeze it on with my teeth, then put the putty over the top. I have never ever had a hook length using any of the coated braids and putting it on that part where I put the shot and the bit of putty on. It's a complete fallacy. It does apply to monofilament, it does apply to fluorocarbon, but when I put that shot on there and cover it with putty, I want that shot not to move. And yes, you can put putty straight on the hook length without having to put a shot on, but I like the shot on there with a putty moulded around it so it cannot come off, cannot move if there's any warmth otherwise, so that when you're playing a fish and bring it back in, be it a bream or otherwise, your putty isn't always coming off all the time. It's just, it's a common sense thing to me. It's something I've learned over, probably 8 years of practice. Right, I've described what and how I use for pop-ups to hold them down. As you can see, I've got a number 6 shot here. Sometimes I use a number 8 if I'm using a smaller pop-up, but generally I use a number 6. As you can see, that's the open end there, and you can see the broken bit there. Do not put your shot right at the end of the unbroken bit, because if you do, when you mould the putty round, you'll end up covering up the actual broken bit, so it won't spin. So I tend to put the shot literally probably about 3mm away from the 3mm away from the end of the unbroken hook length. Very crude, I'm sure, very crude, but I bite that on. As you can see there, how that flops over. You might think that will break it. It will never break it. So I've got the shot there, and that is not going to come off at all. I've got my putty here, and just simply mould it over the top of the shot, round, like that. What is important is that you just squeeze it down like that, so it's nice aerodynamic. As you can see, we haven't actually covered the coated bit. That is so important. Putty will always feel sticky in your hands, especially when you're doing it on a warm day or doing it at home or otherwise. But once it goes in the water, even if the water's warm, it will immediately tighten up on itself, no matter what putty you use, and it will become a lot more solid. But as you can see there, I haven't covered the coated area, the uncoated area up, which allows that to spin. So in carp fishing magazines, they always come in line with where the hook's pointed, but you know, there's probably 359 degrees that it can come from in different directions. Wherever that carp comes, that unbroken bit of the braid allows it to spin round. So if the carp's hoovering round, that will spin round and hook itself. A very simple way, but as you can see, I always tend to fish my pop-ups literally that far off the deck. We're fishing this on a piece of, it's on my Nash tray, and on the Nash tray it looks very obvious that this is a pop-up. Believe you me, when you drop that onto any lake bed, lake beds are not like swimming pools, things like that, that is not as obvious. It's very easy to get swept away about, oh, they'll see that that's not on the bottom and things like that. I have caught thousands, probably tens of thousands of carp on all sorts of waters, in summer, winter, clear, deep, big fish, small fish, medium-sized fish, hard fish to catch, easy fish to catch, and I've caught, probably I would say, if you take away zigs and you take away floater caught fish, I would say that 90% of the fish that I've caught in the last 8-9 years have been caught on a presentation just like that. Literally that simple, so it can spin round. Just think about your chod rig. When you fish a chod rig, that's generally a lot higher up than that, and it doesn't stop people catching carp. People are so spooky about using pop-ups, and I don't think they need to be. You know, carp go round, they eat. Carp compete for food. When a carp comes in on that pop-up, it is disturbing the silt, it's disturbing the weed. It's not like holding it in your hands in your kitchen or in your study, where it is a clear environment. It's dark. Often fish are caught in the night, they're caught in the half light. That is such an effective presentation. I'm sure there's some of you out there that simply only use bottom baits, and there's some of you that only use chods or otherwise, but believe you me, this is an incredible presentation, and for the majority of fishing I do, this works superbly. It spins, it hooks, that's all I need. Having tied your hook length up, it's a question of how, and people describe this, how long should your hook length be? When I describe hook lengths, I'm not describing the actual length of the hook length, I'm describing the bit between the putty and my loop knot. So it's not actually from one end to the other end, so it's not from the lead to where the end of that is, it's actually the bit between the putty and the loop knot. My starting point is 8 inches from those two things. That's the starting point that I will kick off. That's generally just to fish over bits of ground bait, boilies, things like that. If I'm fishing over lots of chopped up bait, if I'm fishing very tight, so if I'm fishing over what I call the mush and I'm fishing in a tight area, I will decrease that to probably about 5 to 6 inches. If I'm fishing for bigger fish, say at Church Pool or somewhere like that, where the fish need to tilt up a lot, I tend to increase that to the loop knot to about 12 inches. So it makes it probably a hook length of about 14 inches. But again, it's a matter of experimenting. But a starting point is about 8 inches for a lot bigger fish, up to 12 inches. And for fishing over particle mass baits close in, maybe 5 or 6 inches. 6 inches is probably about right. Most of the time that I use a multi-rig, I'm using it with a lead clip system, a safety lead, again, virtually all the time. Occasionally I use it with a helicopter, but I prefer it with a straightforward lead clip. Now this little fella, this little beauty, is probably one of the things that you should have and probably haven't got. This is a Nash big ring swivel. Whenever I do shows at conferences and talks, you'd be amazed at how many people haven't seen this and how soon Nash on the day sell out of these. These are absolutely incredible, and it works with any lead clip that's obviously not pre-tied up. So I always use this with lead clips, because what this allows is, and you'll see when I show you the lead setup, it allows, that goes into the lead clip, and that is what you're going to tie your loop on, and that allows the hook length to flop over. The last thing you want is a hook length that's lifted up, and if you tie your hook length tight to the swivel, no matter how critically you balance it, or I think you will end up with a large loop. So if possible, whatever setup you're using, you need to get some of these Nash big ring swivels, which you will either attach your diffusion leader, you'll push into your lead clip, you'll push the tubing into it. But I don't care what setup, that's a standard one that will fit all lead clips, ESP, Nash, Fox, as long as they're not pre-attached with a leader, they'll always work. If there's one thing that's changed my carp fishing innumerably, it's the Nash diffusion leader. Now, I always promote what I think is good, but I never ever, as far as I can remember, say that this product is better than somebody else's product, or you need to use this, and you don't use a mugger, use a fang or otherwise, because I think people see through that. I can only tell you what I have confidence in. But what I can say is, of all the leaders I've ever used, and I've tried most of them, I beg you to try the Nash diffusion leader. These are incredible. And when people first look at them, when I take them to shows, they say, well, that's green, so it'll be alright over weed, but it's not much good over any of the bottom. The thing about the diffusion leader is the name, it's diffusion. Whatever you put that on, that will literally disappear or blend in. And when I take people to shows and we put it on the tank, the Nash tank, it literally disappears. I often take people to the lake when I'm fishing, or they come and see what I'm doing, and I show them this leader, and I always say, look at that leader, and then we'll just gently drop it in the pond so they can see where it goes, and you can see it go down. I say, look away, now look back. They cannot see the leader anymore. Even if it's in that 1 or 2 foot of water, if it's a clear bottom, literally all they will see is the knot on the loop end, and they will probably see the lead. That diffusion leader completely disappears. Now it's a £45 rating. If leaders are allowed on your water, and the majority of water they are, and if they're used sensibly, there's not a problem, I implore you to use those. I'll never tell people to change fishing tackle. Something's better than somebody else's, but this is as near as I'll get to telling people what to do. The leaders come as they are, either looped like that with nothing on each end, or you can get them pre-formed with a helicopter rig on, you can get them pre-formed with a safety clip on them, you can get them at 0.75 metres, or you can get them at 1.5 metres. This is the 0.75 metre one, which I use for virtually everything. I even use it for my naked chod. I don't suppose it's naked, is it really, because it's a leader, but that is what I use for the naked chod, and it's absolutely brilliant. As I said earlier, I always use it with a lead clip. It's a matter of using, again, your favourite lead clip. The waters I'm fishing at the moment are very, very weedy, and it's a matter of popping the lead off. Now, there are all sorts of discussions on whether lead should pop up or not. All I'll say is that waters which are weedy, and I use lead clips where the lead can pop up, the majority of fish I land. When the lead doesn't come off, I end up trying to play a weed bed and you pull out of the fish. You know, whether if it allows you to drop the lead off, I implore you again to pop that lead off. Of course you don't want to pop it off when it's a clear water and you've got things like that, but it's far safer to the carp to pop the lead off in weed so that you don't end up trying to drag a carp attached to a weed bed and pulling through its mouth. These are the nice little Nashi short safety, I think it's a weed safety bolt, and they are such a short little lead clip and such a short little rubber at the back, and when you are playing carp through the weed, that will always pop off and your lead will pop off. Once the lead pops off, then the carp will come higher up on the surface because it's attached. The last thing you want is that coming off, running down the line. You've got a carp at one end, you're playing a weed bed, no good at all. As you can see, I've mounted the big ring swivel inside this. You'll see that when lead clips come, they've got the hole here, and that goes through the small bit. So if you imagine that there, that is in the middle of there. So I'll just show you that, how that works like that. That there is going through that there. There's a little peg that goes through it. That stops your lead clip popping off. If the lead clip can't pop off, the pressure's on the lead. If the lead pops off, the fish comes high in the water. So as you can see, I've mounted the big ring swivel inside a safety bead. Now you can also do those, certainly in the ESP ones, certainly in the larger Nash ones. I've not tried other people's lead clips, but they are absolutely essential to make the setup as efficient as it should be, because it allows it to flop over. So generally, before I go fishing, I've probably got 6 of these tied up. I've got the very short ones for fishing and weed, and I've got the longer ones for casting out at range, and depending where I am. If you're sensible, you can just keep using the same leader time and time again, as long as you don't crack off. Because where you tie the leader there with your line, as long as you don't super glue it or trim it, once you finish with the leader and you're going to try a different one, you just cut your knot off and you just loop your leader up as I have here. This leader's been used 2 or 3 times, but because I was using a different rig, I've just cut this off, and that leader is able to be used time and time again. They don't go off, they're 45 pound breaking. With them being smooth, they're safe to the carp's flanks, they disappear on the bottom. There's absolutely nothing not to like about them. Again, I can only describe what I use for most of my carp fishing. As you can see from the coating on the lead, most of the bottoms I tend to fish are choddy, weedy or otherwise. These are the Nash flat pairs, which is a style of lead I prefer. I'm not massively keen on shiny leads, nothing against them, but I prefer this sort of mottled effect when you see it on the bottom. All leads do show up in comparison to the diffusion leader, but it's as good as it needs to be. What size of lead? Well, again, that's like what kind of boilie, what colour of boilie. You use what you're confident in. As hooks have got sharper and sharper, I think the weight of the lead has become less important. In the olden days, when we were using hooks, you know, like the Mustard O'Shaughnessy's and hooks like that, they were comparatively, well, they were blunt in comparison to the hooks we use nowadays. The hooks we use nowadays are extremely sharp, and I personally think that most carp hook themselves on the hook or prick themselves on the hook well before they feel the weight of the lead. On some waters it has been important to use a very heavy lead for educated carp to hook themselves, but what I found that on most waters my starting point is a 2 ounce lead. Now obviously the first thing is your lead has got to be large enough for you to cast the distance that you're casting to. No point using a 1.5 ounce lead and dropping short. Majority of my fishing is no more than 80 yards, and using a fluorocarbon main line, a 3 pound test curve rod, I can hit 80 yards with a 2 ounce lead as long as there's not a wind. If there's a wind in my face, and I go up to a 2.5 ounce lead. The problem is, one of the things I always do when I'm carp fishing is I like to feel the lead hit the bottom. Very, very light leads give you a misinformation. Whatever you're hitting tends to feel like it's hitting the bottom. Very, very heavy leads are so heavy that they just plunge through and I can't feel the bottom. So generally the heaviest lead I use when I want to fill the bottom is 2.5 ounces, but my standard starting point is a 2 ounce lead. With a 2 ounce lead and a fluorocarbon mainline, as I cast out I can actually feel the bottom, and if I can feel the bottom donk or whatever, I'm happy about that. I'm not looking for super clear spots, but I'm wanting to know that my lead and my hook bait are not dropping in an area of thick weed, and it straightens hook length out, things like that. So starting point is 2 generally. If I'm fishing close range and I don't want to make much of a splash, I use 1.5 ounce lead. I do think that a splash of leads is something that can spook carp, so I try to use the lightest lead when I'm fishing small intimate waters in the edge, and again at range I'm using 2.5 ounces just to get on a longer chuck with a side wind, or if I'm using maybe a PVA stringer. Right, talked about lead sizes, talked about lead clips, talked about the diffusion. As you can see there, I'm using the short safety bead. Mounted the lead, which is a 2 ounce lead, and I've just slid the tail rubber just onto it. Always wet it when you're fishing because it slides easier. Any pressure will pop that, will be on that lead, and it'll pop that off. The next thing is how we're going to attach our multi-rig to the big ring swivel. The purpose of the big ring swivel, as I mentioned earlier, is when you cast out, that will rotate in mid-air. As it's rotating in mid-air, it stops any tangles at all, so it literally flies like a helicopter rig, and on the bottom it lays like that. You do not want that looped up. So you can see we've got the big ring swivel, we've got the lead, and we now just need to put the hook length onto that. So we've got our stiffened hook length here. We've made sure that the pop-up is balanced correctly, and we're ready to rock and roll, as they say. I'm fishing today over mass particles in the edge, bits of mush and things like that, so I'm going to use a comparatively short hook length. The first thing I do is just a little bit of silicone. This is Nash 1mm silicone, and this is what I'm going to cover my knot, my loop knot with. Again, it's just one of those little things, is that it neatens the presentation up. So the first thing I do, and if you forget this you'll ruin your presentation, is just thread that through and slide that down. That's okay, that's out the way. That's going to cover the knot that we put on there, and it makes it a lot neater. You get your big ring swivel and you loop your hook length through it. Remember, where your knot is needs to be about 4 to 5 inches or 5 to 6 depending on how you are. Simply tie a loop as though you're doing a grinner knot, and through here 4 or 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, having tied 4 times, gently, and I mean gently, pull it together. You're also needing to create, now that's gently pulled together. No need to go mad on it, just pull that nice and tight. Okay, with that tight, just use your teeth to pull it nice and securely. You now have a loop knot at that end. Take your scissors, trim it off. Make sure you trim the right end off, of course, as well. I have done that before. I've trimmed the wrong end off. I've trimmed my hook length off, which I was not very pleased with. Okay. Now this is the only time I ever add super glue to my setup. Again, just a little tiny bit of super glue just over that knot to secure it. Okay. Now I've landed carp to almost 50 pound on this, and that loop has never pulled. Once that's super glued, that will not move. You've got the silicone there. Just going to slide that silicone over the loop knot, and you've got your presentation. So that literally is what I would fish over particles. That, as you can see there, when that lead hits the bottom, let's put the lead on just to show. Clip that lead on there. Okay. When the lead hits the bottom, that will be suspended by the foam, which I'm going to tell you about later. That will hit like that. That loop allows it to sit proud, and as the PVA foam comes off, it will fall like this, and it falls at extension like that. Once it's at full extension, then it is sitting beautifully. Whatever way the carp comes, it can spin round into the carp's mouth. Simple. The carp sucks that in, and literally, as it tightens up, it will prick itself. If you have a very long hook length that's curled, the carp can get that in its mouth and not prick itself. The thing about this is because it's at full extension, because it's been steamed, once the carp lifts up slightly, it will literally lift that up and prick itself on the hook like that. As you can see there, that's not even one of the Rigget sharp ones, that's how sharp they are. That hook, that carp has pricked itself immediately. It will bolt and it will hook itself against the lead, but the initial prick is not against that lead. That's never even felt the weight of that lead. That hook is pricked on that sharp hook. There'll be obviously the diffusion leader to the fluorocarbon to the lead, which will also be additional weight. That lead does not come into play straight away. Once that carp is hooked, then that's your fish hooked. That's such a simple thing, but that big ring swivel, that loop and the silicone covering it allows it to sit at full extension. So whatever way the carp comes, you don't want it all over the top of it, just like that, and that's spot on. When I fish the multi-rig, one of the main things I try and get through to people is it's a rig that should be fished in isolation. In other words, you don't fish it with a PVA bag, you don't fish it with a stringer and things like that. You can start fishing it with a small mesh bag if you fill the mesh bag full of foam and things like that, but for the simplicity of the explanation here today, I'm talking about fishing the multi-rig as a single bait. Important thing with a multi-rig is that it sits at full extension and that it does not get curled up or otherwise. One of the major things in my success has been the use of PVA foam and foam nuggets. Now these are the solar ones, which are the coloured ones. Now I do speak to people and it does make me laugh. They have two £300 rods, they have £300 reels, they have tickets that cost them £500. And when it comes to PVA foam, they say, oh, I found a bit of packaging foam and it's just as good. No, it isn't. The best foam on the market, in my opinion, is made by Solar, and it's a coloured foam. Why do I use coloured foam? Well, the thing about coloured foam is when I use a rig, I always use 2 bits of foam to suspend it so it drops down. By using 2 colours, you know when both bits have come off. So if you just use green or just use white or just use blue, sometimes at range you think, have 2 pieces come off or has 1 piece come off? But by using 2 different colours, you'll know when both bits have come off. The pink will come off and then the green will come off. So I find it so much easier. Again, look at the tub that these are in. Again, this isn't some kind of trendy camo that's carpy. It's because I don't want sunlight on these. PVA foam is only good as a nugget when it's solid. You can see how solid that is. If that gets moist or if that gets sunlight on it, it will get smaller and smaller. How many of you have got foam nuggets that look like that instead of that? Foam nuggets are for buoyancy. The buoyancy keeps your hook length off and they'll pop off. When you use it like that, all that ends up being is like a lump of horrible bread flake, and that's no good at all. So by keeping it in a tub like this and keeping a top on it and keeping it covered in whatever coating you want, it stops sunlight getting on it and ruining your foam, because your foam needs to be like that and it can't be like that. If you put foam like that, you won't get any tangles, but that'll just sit like a big blobby glob on the bottom and it's no good whatsoever. It's just a simple thing. So coloured foam, and make sure you look after it. So how do we put the PVA foam on the hook? Well, the traditional way that I see most people do, and it's absolutely hopeless, and again it's something I used to use, is they get the foam, they hook it through there like that, they wet it like that, and they squeeze it together like that. That's lovely. You will cast that out, and yes, you won't get a tangle, but because there's no buoyancy, that'll hit straight on the bottom like that and it'll sit, because the weight of that will absorb water. It's fighting against the buoyancy of your pop-up, and you've got a horrible globby mess all over your pop-up. Now that's in summer, never mind winter. and you'll sit there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, and all you'll see is little bits of it come off. As soon as that hits the lake bed, I want to make sure that my end tackle is fishing. So something like that is a total waste of time, so don't do it like that. So what we need to get, I mean, look how difficult that is to get off. That's horrible. So we've got that off, and I'll show you how to use PVA foam correctly. Okay, we'll sit the pop up correctly. Right, first thing you do, 2 different colours. We're going to use pink and we're going to use foam of blue. Always put it through that bit first. Always through there first. Gently moisten both ends of that. Put that there, and squeeze that there. Now if you notice, when you look there, you see I've created a hole in the middle. You've got the buoyancy of 2 bits of foam, and that buoyancy will sit that off the bottom like that. Your pop-up will sit, and you can drop it in the water and test it, and I assure you this is true. So when that hits the lake bed, that is like that. You don't want the PVA foam to melt, as people think. You want the PVA foam to come off. Because there's a hole in the middle, water will get up the middle, and water will naturally force the 2 bits off. So what happens is, the water will literally push that off first. You'll always see that one come off first, that'll come up. Now it's only attached to 1 bit, that'll then come off, and that foot goes to the surface. So you'll see the 2 colours. It will always be the colour on the back that comes off first, and then the colour off the front that comes off second. I do not take my eyes off the water, and until 2 pieces of foam come off, I will not sit down and start fishing. Foam's great because it shows you exactly where you've dropped your lead. And sometimes you think you've cast tight to a weed bed or a snag or wherever you think you are, and when the foam pops up, and remember the foam goes straight up, you think, I wasn't as near as I expected. But foam is an incredible thing, and it's the solar foam. I use it with all my rigs, and I pay for it as well. A Yorkshireman paying for it. So that's how good it is. Absolutely essential. It does cut your distance down, and you know, in a headwind, 2 bits of foam take probably 10 yards off. So all I do then is cut the foam in half, and again lick it, and again you don't have as much air resistance, but I always use PVA foam with this. It's absolutely essential with a multi-rig. I've described how I tie up a multi-rig using the standard Fang X hook, which is what I tended to use for literally 100% of my multi-rig use until probably the last 12 months. The thing about the Fang X rig, which I described, is, as I said, you get a fish, it can be a bream, it can be a carp, and providing you don't damage the hook point, you can pull the loop back up, reset, and off you go. However, a couple of people talked to me about the Fang twister hooks. Now the twister hook is what I call a square bend hook. You can see there it's a real square, aggressive. Some say it's ugly, but I think it's actually quite cute actually. There's something different about it. So it's either ugly hook, so either Marmite, isn't it? You either love them or you hate them. I was using these square bend hooks for about a year for bottom baits and for double bottom baits. Absolutely incredible. And a couple of people have gone on to me, particularly Mark Watson, about using twisters with the multi-rig. But what I didn't like with the twisters with the multi-rig is that you didn't have the curve, and I felt the curve actually sat the multi-rig better. I like the twister hook, and I like the multi-rig setup, but it didn't work together for me. So what I started doing is to in effect form that angle, that flipping effect. I started to use a little bit of shrink tube. And what I found with this shrink tube is that it creates a very, very aggressive effect. And when I'm fishing for my bigger fish on waters where I really am expecting 1 bite, if I'm lucky, I tend to use what I call the twisted multi-rig, because it's a twister and it's a multi-rig. And the only difference is you tie it up exactly the same, but using a twister hook, you mount it exactly the same characteristics with the putty, the brake. All that I'm doing is I'm adding a shrink tube kicker underneath that sits out. This really flips it over, and what it allows me to do is it allows me to use quite wide gape twister hooks. So I use 5s and 6s, which are quite wide gape, with tiny pop-ups, ultra buoyant pop-ups, and I find that you get, for the bigger fish and for the cuter fish, and when I'm getting 1 bite, these are slightly more effective. I like the twisting effect, and it does tend to get me more. I have fished them side by side, even on the more prolific waters, and I'm getting probably 3 bites to every 2 on the standard Fang X. Now it's not, you know, not some proper science, but I do find that that is slightly more effective. It has got one downside in that with the multi-rig, when that pulls down to the bottom and it's a Fang X, you just slide it back on. But because you're using shrink tube, once that shrink tube comes off, then you can't really push the shrink tube back up. I have seen people using kickers and things like that, but there's nothing as effective as shrink tube that really kicks out at an angle. So if you're fishing a water where you're getting lots of takes, the standard Fang X curved shank multi-rig is great. But when you're fishing for literally 1 bite, I tend to go for the twister hooking setup. Absolutely incredible, and it's, you know, it's just one of those things, isn't it? It's what you're comfortable with. I'm happy with the Fang X for most of the things, but for the bigger fish I will go for the twister version. One of the big things that seems to have kicked off nowadays is hook sharpening. Hook sharpening for me goes back to 1985-86 when I fished on the Tylery. My hook of choice then were the Mustard O'Shaughnessy's 34021s off the top of my head. Absolutely stunning hooks, really strong, but the problem is they were pretty blunt, to be honest. They were great hooks, and sometimes you had to have more of a blunt hook to land these fish in the Tylery with a weed. What Eric Hodson, my old pal, God rest his soul, he came up with the idea of sharpening the hooks. He'd got some, I think they were the original Hardy's hook sharpeners, and we were sharpening the hooks, the O'Shaughnessy's. Now, we weren't sharpening them like we sharpen them today, but it certainly made a difference because they were chisel point, and it just really, you know, it made them more effective. Nowadays, it's really kicked off big style with hook sharpening, particularly since Jag have got involved, and they do incredible products. Can't recommend them highly enough. If you want to sharpen hooks, the gear that the Jag people do is really good. The vice, the various stones, you know, they have taken hook sharpening to the nth degree. I saw Jason Hayward do it, I've seen Jim Shelley do it, and it literally is a work of art. However, the majority of people who attempt to sharpen hooks make more of a mess of it than they do make a good job of it. With the hooks that I use, which is the Nashi, if I use a hook, a 7 or an 8, be it a twister or a Fang X, I don't sharpen them at all. I cannot notice any discernible difference. However, when I'm using what I call comparatively large hooks, which is 4, 5s and 6, I polish them. I'm not the greatest hook sharpener in the world. I'm not bad, but I will not in any way as good as people like Jim Shelley and Jason Hayward. So yes, I can make a difference at that point. They seem pretty brutal, but they do an incredible job. So it's a question of, you know, are you prepared to risk it? The majority of people who watch this video, it's really not worth doing. If you're using a Fang X or a twister in 7, 8 or 10, you are not going to make them really sharp unless you're particularly proficient at it. However, once you get to 4, 5 and 6, it's worth having a go to at least polish them, if not sharpen them. And to be honest, I thought I was good at sharpening hooks until the guys at Rig It Tackle did my hooks for me. And the quality of those it's amazing. It really takes it to an nth degree. Now, people have contacted me on social media saying, is it worth the money? Well, you have to decide, don't you? You've got rods that are £200–300, you've got tickets that are £500, you're spending £100 on travel, bait, food. Are you prepared to spend a bit more on sharpening hooks? I'm not going to tell you to do. Personally, if it was me and I thought it made a difference, then I would do, you know, and I have sharpened hooks from Rig It. I mean, they've even done me size 7s, and I can see the difference on a 7. As I said earlier, for most of you, don't do it. Either polish them with a sharpening stone, don't be too brutal, or get them done professionally. It does make a difference, like everything. The final part of this is the steaming of hook lengths. Now, when it comes to steaming of hook lengths and coated braids, because they come on spools, that is what they look like. Now, that is a coated braid which hasn't been steamed. Now, as I described earlier, a coated braid is only effective for a multi-rig when it's a straight line. The sooner the hook the fish pricks itself against the hook and then against the lead, the better. So if you imagine that coated braid, that carp has got absolutely loads of movement before it hooks itself. So the last thing you want is your braid to be sat on the bottom like that. So it's exactly the same stuff, and what we're going to do is we're going to steam it and just see the difference that this makes. Always do it at home, don't do it on the lakeside, because a plastic kettle you can touch like that, whereas a kettle on the bank you will just absolutely ruin it. As you can see here, so we've got that curly bit of coated braid. Always be careful with your hands. And when you steam your braid, turn it in your fingers together like that. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to lay this down. That is the difference. See how that's steamed? If you imagine your hook's at one end, your lead's at the other, as soon as the carp lifts itself up, it's going to prick itself against the lead. There's no curl. Imagine when you cast out, it doesn't tangle on itself, it sits proud, it hits the lake bed, it sits proud, the foam's holding it up, and when it pops down, it will sit at full extension. And once it's at full extension, it will hook itself against the lead. Again, it's one of those minor things. There are probably 20 little things to a multi-rig that make all the difference. The nearer you get to the golden 20, the more effective your rig will be. And I'm sure you'll catch loads of carp. Let me know how you're getting on. Either drop a line to me or contact me on social media. Good luck.